Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Helen Allen. I'm the executive director of the Winter Show. We're thrilled to have you all with us as we celebrate our 70th edition. We are now, I think, officially the longest-running art fair in the world. So no small feat. And out of those 70 years, we've been here 67 of those years. So we're thrilled to be welcoming you all here today, and delighted to have this wonderful panel. I'm going to introduce Mitch Owens and then turn it over to him. Mitch has been a long friend of mine, of the shows, and is the wonderful editor of The World of Interiors. So without further ado, over to you, and then we'll move on from there. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Mitch Owens. I'm the American editor of The World of Interiors. That's a position as opposed to nationality. And I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you, Helen, and the Winter Show for having us and this panel about Dorothy Liebes, the textile designer. And we have with us today, starting from my far right, Alexa Griffith Winton and Susan Brown, who are the curators of A Dark, a Light, and a Bright, the exhibition about Dorothy Liebes at the Cooper Hewitt Museum. Scott Powell, to my left, who is the author of the book Frances Elkins, Visionary American Designer, and dealer Liz O'Brien, the author of Ultramodern, Samuel Marx. And I believe we're going to have a video, is that true, about, here we go, about Dorothy Liebes to set us in place.
In 1947, a glamorous designer posed for Life magazine. She was hailed as one of the most all-pervasive cultural influences in U.S. life. This charismatic and talented woman was the path-breaking Dorothy Liebes, a master weaver and champion of innovative textile design.
Food, shelter, clothing. These three things are very basic in our lives. And two of those brackets are concerned with cloth.
Dorothy Liebes opened her San Francisco weaving studio in 1930, sparking the attention of prominent architects like Frank Lloyd Wright and Samuel Marx. They admired how Liebes's textiles captured light and responded to space, creating elegant and luxurious modern interiors. The Liebes look soon appeared in glamorous spaces from Hawaii to New York City, including the Plaza Hotel's swanky Persian Room nightclub. Here, Liebes chose a palette of blues, greens, and sparkling metallics. Her team then wove hundreds of tiny lights throughout the panels to evoke a starry night sky.
I used to weave almost everything I could lay my hands on. Some of it was not engineering-wise, too wise, but it was a chance for me to experiment with colors and textures. I found that unusual materials were not badly suited to certain kinds of cloth.
Along with unconventional materials, bold, unusual color combinations came to define Liebes's unique style.
Color, as you know, is the magic elixir. It's the alchemy of life. All people love color. The impact of beautiful color combinations is just undeniable.
Overseeing two studios in San Francisco and later New York, she worked with a diverse team of talented weavers to create hand-woven textiles for restaurants, passenger ships, airliners, and couture clothing. Fashion designers including Bonnie Cashin, Adrian, and Claire Potter designed clothing to showcase her striking one-of-a-kind fabrics made of metallic yarns, cellophane, brocade ribbons, beads, and other materials. But her designs weren't just for the wealthy. Liebes believed good design should extend to all Americans, regardless of budget. For decades, she teamed with textile mills to interpret the colors and textures of her hand-woven fabrics for mass production, leading her industry partners to commercial success. For DuPont, Liebes experimented with newly developed fibers such as Dacron and Antron. By demonstrating the design capabilities of these materials, she helped build consumer confidence in synthetics.
In general, I think that fabrics are a woman's #1 weapon for enhancing her personality. So when you do your fabrics, they must do something for you as a person and an individual. And I think the man-made fiber picture has given us this world of new material with which to work.
As a spokesperson and color stylist for Lurex, she curated new palettes, like this collection inspired by the celadon greens and soft salmon pinks of 18th century Chinese porcelain, and introduced glittering metallics into everything from automobile upholstery to handbags, shoes, and swimwear. Overseas, international manufacturers also sought Liebes's expertise, as she helped rebuild and modernize the global textile market following World War II. Through these various collaborations, Liebes became a household name. She routinely appeared in magazines and on radio and television, cementing her status as one of the foremost voices on color, home design, and decoration. After decades of extraordinary success, Liebes was honored by New York's Museum of Contemporary Crafts with this career retrospective. The colorful 1970 exhibit featured some of her most successful fabrics and demonstrated the profound influence Liebes had on nearly every aspect of 20th century design, an influence which can still be felt today.
I would say she's as quotable as her fabrics are memorable. It would be very nice to have her here.
So that was a great overview of Liebes's career. And now Alexa and I just want to fill in a few more details before we go on discussion for those of you who are not familiar with her background. And I am going to use notes in the rest of brevity. Dorothy Wright was born in Santa Rosa, California in 1897, and she studied art at UC Berkeley and art education at San Jose State before coming east to get a master's degree in art education at Columbia Teachers College. Along the way, she had taken an interest in weaving and purchased her first floor loom, which she had shipped to her here in New York City. And Liebes did not come from money. She had a very middle-class background, and so she, in fact, used her woven fabrics, mostly in the form of baby carriage blankets, which she sold to New York City stores, including Saks Fifth Avenue, to support her during her graduate school years. So around the same time, she met Leon Liebes, and Leon was the son of a wealthy department store family in San Francisco, and they married in 1928, but they very quickly fell out over Liebes's desire to be a professional designer. Leon could not abide the idea of having a wife who worked, and Liebes could not give up on this dream of hers. And so she left him in 1930 after just 2 years of marriage with, as she wrote, nothing but her clothes and her loom. Her hand-woven textiles very quickly attracted the attention of some local architects like Gardner Daly and Timothy Pfluger, who discovered that Liebes had something unique to offer architects: a clear understanding of how textiles shape the experience of architectural space through texture, color, and light. Pfluger gave her her first major commissions, which included the San Francisco Stock Exchange Club, the Paramount Theater in Oakland, and the Patent Leather Lounge at the St. Francis Hotel. In 1937, she was hired to curate the decorative arts display at the Golden Gate International Exposition. She traveled across the United States and to 11 different European countries, curating the objects for this display. And it really elevated her from being a well-known regional designer to having a platform as a nationally and internationally recognized design authority. And she also made an incredible network of connections to architects, designers, and artists around the United States and Europe, which she continued to leverage through the rest of her career. As Liebes became a regular presence in shelter magazines, the Liebes look also began spreading through the popular culture, through fashion by designers like Bonnie Cashin,
Claire Potter and Adrian, as well as through film production and costume design. And the best example that we have found of a film is East Side, West Side, a 1949 film starring Ava Gardner and Barbara Stanwyck, which is completely saturated with Dorothy Liebes fabrics. If you really want to understand how they were meant to function in the interior, I highly recommend watching that film. Through her industrial collaborations in the post-war period, the Liebes look became widely available to consumers in the form of drapery and upholstery fabrics, woven blinds, cushions, throw pillows, carpets, and other non-textile products like wallpaper and tiles. It was promoted widely through both the design and the popular press and on radio and television. For example, she was featured in a 9-page full-color spread in Life magazine in 1947. And in a special edition of House and Garden devoted to American design, we see her placed between Rob's John Gibbings and Noguchi. During her lifetime, she was very much a peer of those men, as well as other designers like Henry Dreyfuss, Raymond Loewy, and Donald Deskey, who are all much better known today. So over the past months, many people have asked us, how did someone who was so well known during her lifetime become so completely erased from the history of American design? And we have a few different thoughts about that. Perhaps it was because her most important commissions were photographed in black and white, which really fail to convey the dazzling color and sparkle that her fabrics brought to the interior environment. Perhaps it is the fault of historians who have often attributed interiors only to one person, usually the male architect who headlines the project, and all of the other collaborators, including lighting and furniture designers and textile designers, are erased from those stories as the years go by. When Liebes died in 1972, Jack Lenore Larson wrote, "Dorothy Liebes was a titan, one of those few people who loom larger than life, who seem to approach things from the top, who are assured and convincing enough to persuade clients to their best effort. Many of her friends are giants too, people who have shaped the contemporary environment." Dorothy Liebes both shaped and colored the contemporary environment, and I hope that through our discussion today, you'll see just how pervasive her influence was.
So I wanted to spend a little time talking specifically about some of the collaborations that she had with architects and interior designers. This was how she first emerged as a kind of design authority. She had a real knack, as Susan mentioned, for understanding architectural space, especially interior space. And she really thrilled to considering textiles' relationship to an interior. And for her, that meant everything. It meant the color of the walls, it meant objects, it meant the people in it, the light moving through it. She had a saying that textile doesn't stand alone, it must stand in relation to something. And so these interiors are really, I think, excellent examples of that really creative and also analytical approach to textile design. Another aspect of this story that Susan and I have been thinking about over the past few years that we've been working on this project together is that, Liebes really came, she was working in a sort of a golden age of interior design, where you have the increasing professionalization of interior design as a profession, lighting design. She's working, textile design. Also, she is helping shape that profession. And so you have these people who are really at the top of their field and defining it. People like Richard Kelly, the lighting designer, working with William Paulman, collaborating with Dorothy Liebes. So it was a particularly interesting and creative moment in that regard. One of her first architect collaborators was the San Francisco architect Timothy Pfluger. He was one of the first people to commission textiles from her, and this is a wonderful example of a project that is a Frances Elkins, Timothy Pfluger, and Dorothy Liebes interior. This is the mayor's office at the Golden Gate Exposition on Treasure Island. And this was a special space for the mayor to receive people during this very popular World's Fair that was happening in San Francisco in that year. And you can see the really exuberant drape behind the mayor's desk there, and with the wonderful swagging of this kind of overscale and knotted loop fringe that became a real defining aspect of Liebes's work, especially in this early phase. And one reason why it's so successful is it works really well in black and white. We have no idea what the color palette of this room is. It could be anything, but we get a wonderful sense of the texture and the movement in that drape. Another really important project was Shangri-La, Doris Duke's Shangri-La. And Duke commissioned Liebes to create textiles for Shangri-La in 1937 when Marion Sims Wyeth was working to build it in Honolulu. And the original drapes that you see in this picture are actually, the black and white photograph, are actually still in place in the house now. It's the only example that we know of Dorothy Liebes textiles still in situ. Obviously, textiles are fragile, and smoking and sunlight and all of those other things really conspire to shorten its lifespan. So it's quite amazing to have those still there. And then the color photos are from a panel from 10 years later. And this is in the collection of Museum of Arts and Design. And you can see here the loop fringe is moved all over in this kind of wonderful varied pattern. The palette remains neutral. Of course, this house was all about her collection of antiquities. So that it was not a time or place for the palette to really be competing with that. It's all this wonderful neutral palette. And if you come to the exhibition, you can see it has just the thinnest little bit of metallic woven through that really only grabs the light as you walk past. And that's a wonderful example of how she kind of energizes an interior and takes advantage of people moving through, the light moving across, and so on. One of our favorite projects is the Persian Room. And Henry Dreyfuss had been hired to redecorate the Persian Room in 1950. It had a wonderful Art Deco interior by Joseph Urban. But in the post-war era, it was decided to redo it. And Dreyfuss had a theme or a concept of a Persian pleasure garden. And the palette was all these wonderful blues and greens. And in this panel here, this is the original hand-woven panel that Dorothy Liebes created for the Persian Room. There were 8 sets of windows, and they were each 20 feet high. So you can imagine these are really enormous textiles that really are functioning almost, at the scale of architecture. And Dreyfuss had asked Liebes to have the weavers thread through these tiny little surgical lights. And the lights themselves were hardwired into a dimmer board and could be programmed. And they could imitate fountains or shooting stars or whatever the music or whatever the entertainment at the Persian Room was that evening. And in this photo in the center, you can just see the lights shimmering and twinkling. We looked up and down for a color photo of the Persian Room from this era, never found one. So if you know of one, please tell us. And then 10 years later, again, we're not sure why. We're imagining, food and smoking and fireproofing. But 10 years after the first ones had been installed, they needed replacing. By that time, Liebes had moved on from these very large production hand-weaving projects in favor of her corporate work. But so she provided these power-loomed drapes to replace her original ones. And you can see they're brighter. And they did not have the lights woven into them, but there are, lashings of lurex to kind of take the place of those tiny little electrical lights. William Paulman is an interior designer who she worked with over many years, starting when he was working at Lord & Taylor. And especially in the post-war years, they were often, projects that they both worked on were often published. This is the Matthew Fox penthouse. It was the only apartment on top of the Universal building in Midtown. And Paulman, the entire interior featured Liebes upholstery, window coverings, and blinds. And you can see in the dining room here, it is that all vertical surfaces in this room are covered in these blinds. And just on the right-hand edge of that image, you can see that there is daylight coming through. These blinds were her approach to what she called the problem of the window. And that is, how do you create window coverings that provide privacy, that filter light, that bring light in where you want it, And what is the new paradigm for architecture that has increasingly large spanses of glass? And these blinds became her answer to what she called the problem of the window. And again, if you come to the exhibition, you can see some of the really interesting and analytical approaches that she had to mediating light, to the use of materials, and the really site-specific approach. One of her closest collaborators and friends is Frank Lloyd Wright. He first came to her studio in 1936, unannounced, at the invitation of Timothy Pfluger, and she was terrified. She wrote later that she had assumed that he was what she called a hair shirt modernist, meaning no decoration, no comfort. And of course, nothing could have been further from the truth. And so she left before he arrived, and she couldn't bear being there while he insulted her work in her mind. And one of her weavers came and got her and said, "You have to come back. He's taking everything." And that was the start of a very long friendship and collaboration. They worked on many, many projects together. And one of them, we have a couple in the one in the exhibition in the form of an object. That stool is from the Bartlesville, Oklahoma Price Tower, Frank Lloyd Wright's only skyscraper. And it's, of course, very rare to find furniture that still has its original Dorothy Liebes upholstery. So we're extremely excited. We have a couple pieces of furniture in the show that have their original Liebes upholstery. He also invited her to provide all textiles for the Usonian Exhibition House, which was built in 1953 on the site of the future Guggenheim Museum. It was a fully furnished, inhabitable exhibition house, and Liebes did all of the drapes and the cushion upholstery and blankets and bedding and everything. And it was a mix of hand-woven and power-loomed styles. I will also say that, Wright had such deep respect for craft and the making of things, and he did really see a place for weaving at Taliesin among the fellowship. And he actually asked Liebes to help set up a weaving program at Taliesin in the late 30s and early 40s. So I think it's a really interesting collaboration to think through. All right, now we're going to move into panel mode.
The one thing that I'm really fascinated by about Dorothy Liebes is you talk about her leaving Leon. Her success must have driven him insane afterward. But she seems to have been an instantaneous success. I mean, from like 1930, 32, she's already gaining the respect of all of these leading architects, even in just a regional standpoint. What is it that she was bringing to them that they weren't seeing on the market at all? I mean, I'm really interested in that moment. You're not finding a lot of women working on that scale of technology. She's also someone that we talked about who didn't especially like weaving herself very much. She liked colors and combining all of these things. What is it that she brought to them? I mean, still two words, her books, visionary and ultramodern. She's already that way in 1930.
She is already that way, and it is quite remarkable that in her first year, she opened her studio in 1930 with just 2 employees, and in her first year, she had to ramp up to 17 employees because she had so many major commissions from Pfluger and others. And, this panel is kind of about luxury and luxury in a modern setting, and what does modernity and luxury mean in textile. And I think that she did have a very unique answer to that. For example, I was thinking about the fact that we call all of this loop fringe, but it is a woven effect, and it's fully integrated with the fabric, and it is true to the process of weaving in the sense that the patterning is determined by what is possible on the loom. So that in itself is a very modern approach. We're not looking at print, we're not looking at trimmings, we're not looking at passementerie, we're looking at fully integrated woven effects that are, by the standard of the time, stark and modern, and yet incredibly luxurious with these elaborate textures and the use of metallic
you really understand the luxury aspect of Liebes when you pit it with Samuel Marx interiors and Frances Elkins and William Pullman. In 1938, one of Liebes's fabrics per yard was $100, which we quickly did the math, and it was really meant $2,000 a yard. So, I mean, it ramps up that luxury level to an astonishing degree that I can't even process at the time. How often was Frances Elkins working with Liebes?
They started working together about 1936 to 1956. House and Garden published an article by Dorothy Liebes's husband, Relman Morin, and Dorothy recalled Frances, who died in 1953. She said there was always something on the loom for Frances Elkins. So they were, the second half of Frances's career starting in 1936, they were working together constantly.
Is that the same with Marx? Did he appreciate Liebes straight away?
Well, I don't know when they met, but for sure they would have seen each other at the Golden Gate exhibition, which the Marxes were at, and they were working. It was Marx had married his third wife, Florine May, and they were working on their apartment on Astor Street. And you see so many things in that apartment that were on exhibit at that show, including leather chairs by Billy Haynes, Visosky carpets. Visosky was exhibited at that fair, and all the upholstery fabrics and curtains, and there were bamboo blinds and even bamboo blinds used as folding screens. And from that project on, he worked with Liebes all the time. And the reason that I kind of stumbled into her work was through his interiors. And we were lucky enough to have several pieces with the original fabric. And, so I could see. And, I think I came from the view that metallic yarns were maybe a little, once it pervaded, it was like a little like low market. But these were such chic, luxurious fabrics that I was completely won over right away.
How difficult was it for all of these different materials that she liked to work with to be combined into a single piece of fabric? I mean, we're talking lurex, cellophane, beads, wool, silk.
Measuring tape.
Everything.
Yes, it is not easy. And we did have a wonderful collaboration for this exhibition with the New York Guild of Hand Weavers. And of their own accord, they each chose a Dorothy Liebes sample and tried to recreate it, which is a very instructive exercise. And what I took away from that was that all of these supplemental warp fringes that she had been doing previously, which is like a macro velvet using a second warp and a pile rod, was probably great training for working with lurex, because the elasticity of lurex is so different from any true textile fiber that basically had to have it on its own warp in order to maintain proper tension. So yes, it was not very straightforward. And she did develop a real skill for making that work.
And you have some, I think, show and tell items that feed into this conversation. May we pass them around?
So what Susan's going to be handing around are a few samples from this wonderful weave-in that we did in September, and also an original Dorothy Liebes pillow. So you can get a sense of, those were very popular things to acquire if you were interested in Dorothy Liebes. But it really makes such a difference to be able to feel the textures.
Was she influencing other textile designers at the time, or was she just far and beyond?
Yeah, I think she very much was. And, she absolutely was not the only, weaver who was doing production weaving for interiors, but she was definitely the best known. She did have a lot of trouble with people copying her work. So I think that if you call that a kind of influence, that was also something that was sort of endemic, and she started to get more cautious about lending out her sample cards and things. But yes, she did influence other weavers and textile designers.
But her interest in bringing this very luxurious level of textile down to more of a mass appeal is interesting. Was she always interested in that in the beginning? And how much of her work became mass? And what does mass mean? You're talking to us.
Yes, she really started very early on, as early as the mid-1930s, exploring the options available through mass production. Long before MoMA's good design exhibitions, which are what we sort of think of as the gold standard for that. But she had her first major collaboration with Goodall Fabrics in Sanford, Maine, and it was a very successful first outing in that they really embraced having Mrs. Liebes with them at the factory. They let her work with the engineers on the factory floor, make modifications to the looms so that they could accept a wider range of different yarn types and so on. So they were mutually very happy with the collaboration, and I think that gave her courage to move forward with a variety of different textile manufacturers and other types of manufacturers.
I love listening in the interview, her using the word alchemy in what she was doing, which gives her this sort of crazy medieval moment, straw into gold, or
sometimes quite literally. She really liked to experiment with a lot of different materials.
What was her most challenging material to your mind within what you've studied for the exhibition?
Yeah, there are different types of challenges. From the copious correspondence, I should say that much of our research is based on the Dorothy Liebes papers at Smithsonian's Archives of American Art. So in her correspondence, she seemed to have a lot of trouble sourcing the reeds that are used in their reed screens. And, a lot of people were really attracted to these black bamboo reeds that she had a very hard time getting a hold of and so on. So that was like one type of challenge. And then she had technical challenges with aluminum. She at some point was working toward making aluminum blinds, but finding, that they tended to warp in the sun, in a window blind type situation. There were those kinds of challenges. And then there were, just straightforward weaving challenges. And, as she said, some of these materials she experimented were not too wise from an engineering standpoint, but they were a way to experiment with color. And in my own chapter in the book, I talk about how eventually she was making speculative fabrics, basically, just to show the capabilities of new materials. And so they were things that, it was okay if they couldn't be reproduced at mass scale,
Right.
because she wasn't there to design fabrics for these companies, but rather to inspire them to design fabrics using DuPont materials, for example.
Right. So tell me some more about her work with Samuel Marx that you've seen. I know you mentioned that you've had some pieces of furniture come through with her original fabrics on them.
Right. Well, she's so known as this brilliant colorist, and doing one of my favorite quotes of hers is, "There are no bad colors, only bad color combinations." And, this is very true. Marx's work is very frequently more tonal. The things that he would specify from her would be, beiges and ivories, but with the lurex, with the silver and gold. Sometimes it would be like a slate blue and gray. We're going to see photographs in a while of the Marion Lee Block house in Chicago. And I'm sure this was Mrs. Block, that there were these raspberry-colored curtains. And so you see a lot richer, saturated colors in those projects. But it was definitely, would have been a collaboration. And he was somebody who, his whole practice from around that time of 1939 on, he had his partners that he worked with. Quigley made the furniture. Liebes did the fabrics. Visosky did the carpets. In this sense, he did very ambitious projects, but in this sense, he kept it sort of simple. He had his partners that he relied on, that he went back to over and over again. And I would say that was their relationship.
There's a really wonderful, she has an unpublished memoir that is also in the Archives of American Art, and she speaks about Marx and says, he was a bon vivant. He loved art like I do. And he really appreciated that I could, create textiles in a lower key. And what she meant by that is, for example, those incredible paintings in his apartment. She could just highlight a very subtle color from that would bring the room together, but not in any way detract from those amazing paintings. So it was really fun to read that.
Yeah, I could see that really working. And also the show at the 1939 show, Liebes curated this. And while the New York World's Fair was happening here to such fanfare, quietly, she was introducing work by Giacometti, Franck. There were in that show book bindings by Pierre Legrand. It was very sophisticated. And everyone who visited that show had this exposure, extraordinary exposure, that you could really only have, say, by, being in Paris and, other European capitals. And this was Liebes. She knew what she was doing.
And also,
it was already, as you said, a golden moment. And she's already working at the top of her game.
And she was a very powerful and stalwart advocate for California design. So at the 1939, at the Golden Gate Exposition, she had, Schindler doing indoor-outdoor pavilions very early, and also highlighting many California designers in this international context.
Right, and Billy Haynes did a room, and Frances Elkins did a room.
Should we move ahead with the slides, and we can see some Frances Elkins and some Sam Marx as well?
This is one of the early collaborations of Frances Elkins and Dorothy Liebes. Frances, as many of you know, was working with her brother David Adler, the great Chicago architect, doing very traditional homes around Chicago. She and David renovated this house, Howard Van Doren Shaw house, I think, in 1928. And then in 1936, Frances refreshed the decor with new upholstery, and she brought in these Dorothy Liebes blinds. So this is one of the few instances where you can see Dorothy Liebes blinds and an Elkins interior that's, the more traditional work she was doing in Chicago. Dorothy and Frances collaborated on two large buildings at the 1939 Golden Gate Exposition, the Yerba Buena Women's Clubhouse and the San Francisco building. The clubhouse was where women members would entertain guests. Famous people were there. And then the San Francisco building, the mayor would entertain people and have various functions. So in addition to the main dining room, the Yerba Buena Club had two private dining rooms, and this is one of them with the Dorothy Liebes fabric on these chairs, tables and consoles by Serge Roche, great French designer, George Jensen, silver, these palm form light fixtures. Frances was also doing palm form light fixtures at the San Francisco building. So this drawing on the right, this painting, appeared in House and Garden. It was probably mistakenly attributed to a room in the New York Fair. I've never found photos of that boardroom, but this is probably an early rendering by Frances's friend Jean McComas of that private dining room. You can see the brilliant red on the chairs. And then Frances and Dorothy worked very closely on the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Frances redecorated it after the war, 1946. So there are these beautiful blinds, which were part of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, both in the surf lounge, this is the surf lounge, and in the main dining room. And Frances designed the furniture. She had Remo Scardigli, a Carmel artist, make those golden masks. And then this is the Walter Haas apartment in San Francisco, 1948. There were four of these Louis XV chairs with tapestry upholstery, antique upholstery, and the blinds, you can see the Dorothy Liebes window blinds. The colors were taken from those chairs, as was the color scheme in the entire room. So there's all kinds of pale corals and reds and yellows and grays and something. So that was where Frances and Dorothy would examine objects, plan a room very carefully so that the colors were coordinated. And Frances and Dorothy did this exhibit at the De Young Museum in San Francisco in 1949 with Dorothy Liebes fabrics used as screens, as curtains, blinds, and framed. And the San Francisco Chronicle described the room as Dali-esque. you can see and Frances was a close friend of Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter. You can see the flowers in the foreground were also coordinated. That black vase in the background, Giacometti vase, that same vase in white would go for auction now for maybe $800,000. And Frances is putting one here. She also covered these two directors' chairs in very shiny gold fabric, probably also Liebes, and she designed two other tables there. Rest of other people can describe this room.
Right. This is the Sam and Florine Marx's dining room in Chicago. And, they together, beginning in 1939, amassed an extraordinary art collection. It was not large, but all prime examples. And there's an exhibition catalog from the Museum of Modern Art, School of Paris, on their collection. And when Marx's, so I'm going off topic a bit, but when Marx's widow died in the 1990s, the collection was divided up between the Modern and the Metropolitan Museum, kind of depending on what each institution would need for their collection. So they were two really important gifts. But so here you see the Matisse La Dessert here in the dining room. And this chair, this is Liebes fabric. And you see it's a tonal. It's beige. And this is, you may know this as a Donald Deskey chair. And in the Deskey book, you see this chair. It's made by the Royal Metal Manufacturing Company in Chicago. But the Deskey version, the seat is like a scrolled piece of metal that's perforated. So Marx is doing what he does, which is making it softer, more luxurious by making a model that's upholstered and using Liebes fabric.
With pom-poms.
That's right, with pom-pom tufting. Thank you. That's right. Oh, okay, so this is the living room, and you see over the fireplace, this is the first important painting that they bought, George Braque's Yellow Tablecloth, and they bought this at the Golden Gate Fair. And so you see his influence by Jean-Michel Franck and Air de la Nux in some of the furniture that you see there. And so the upholstery fabric would have been Liebes, and you can just see in the lower left, it's like a folding screen. He has it scrolled up, and this is Dorothy Liebes, a Dorothy Liebes bamboo screen. You also see two wall sconces on either side of the painting, and these were by Billy Haynes, and they were part of his room at the San Francisco Fair. So, I'm under the impression that they were working on this apartment and they shopped it. And, and they did, I don't know if we're going to see everything else, but there's a Marie Cutoli rug by Moreau when you walk in. And we're not going to see all of that, but you can see what a big influence this show had on his work at this moment and everything going forward. Here are Marion Lee Bloch, more great art collectors. A lot of his clients were big art collectors. They were, all friends. And so Marion Lee Bloch. Lee Bloch was the president of the Art Institute for many years. And here you see, I don't know how much detail you can see in terms of the Liebes fabrics, but they're very low key, but it's true. It's when you come into contact with them, you see how really, really yummy they are. And here are the curtains, the raspberry-colored loop fringe curtains.
It's almost as if a certain world belonged to this Liebes club, and they all used Liebes fabrics. And the nice thing about it was that they had their own exclusive Liebes fabric.
Right, because it was always made for them, and it was your own. And we talked about this the other day. There was really just like a gaping void. I mean, if you were doing modern interiors, where would you get fabrics? And she was just a natural. She was so brilliant because so many of these interiors with, glass curtain walls and steel frames, they needed texture and color. And it brought a lot of warmth to these interiors. And, they must have done wonders for the acoustics as well, I've often thought.
She said, "The eye demands relief."
What?
He wrote that the eye demands relief from all of the polished surfaces, particularly in the 1930s, the polished cork and glass brick and so.
Oh, this is the library at the blocks, and you see more. Here it's the opposite. The walls are raspberry colored, and the curtains are beige, and the striped upholstery fabric.
So back to the kind of popular imagination that Liebes's aesthetic became very much a part of. We were really thrilled to find this amazing photograph of Dorothy Lamour in Photoplay, a movie magazine from 1938. And again, what you see, we have no idea what the color of that fabric is, but that looped texture, each loop is almost like its own little chiaroscuro moment. It creates so much drama, and it is just such a wonderful frame in this case for her. But of course, in an interior context, it would be the same. And again, this early period of her work is very much about texture and this kind of very lush looped texture. And then the textile itself is a little bit later, 10 years later, and it's called Beckman Dazzle. And this is sort of a combination of her enthusiasm for Lurex. At that time, she had become the color spokesperson for Lurex. But she's also incorporating, these really extravagant looped fringe panels as well.
I just wanted to talk just for a moment about the title of your exhibition, A Dark, a Light, and a Bright. That's the Liebes formula in a lot of ways.
Is the Liebes formula. She was almost as well known for her color sensibility as she was as a weaver, and she was often hired to be a color consultant, color stylist, and she was very frequently sought out for her opinions on color in the press. I
just think it's a dark.
A dark, light, or bright. Yes. So because she was, called on all the time to give opinions about color, this was one of her sort of quick and easy ways to explain what made a successful color palette in a home or in an outfit or anywhere, really. Whatever you're designing, you need a dark, a light, and a bright to create a successful palette.
Well, I'd like to thank the four marvels here on our panel, Alexa, Susan, Scott, and Liz. Thank you all very much for being here. Your catalog and your books are out in front, and so please buy, sign, buy more. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Winter Show.
Thank you,